Hello. Today I'd like to talk about killing an oyster. My last video was about a foraging trip that I went on with my wife and Doobie. And we went to the Hood Canal here near where I live, where a lot of life lives, including oysters and different kinds of clams, and a lot of other crustaceans and bald eagles and orcas live there, herons. There's all kinds of fish that, well, I didn't see the fish because I was on a tide flat. But what was interesting to me was killing an oyster and eating it. I've made several videos about our food choices, whether to eat animals or plants or fungi, mushrooms. Because mushrooms are not plants. They're different. I've talked about the health consequences of our food choices and different diets, like being primarily plant-based, or our carnivore diet, or a diet that's full of processed foods, or a vegan diet. I even talked about a diet called a diet that's associated with Jainism, which is like I would describe it as a very, very strict vegan diet. Well, I think that there's some very interesting things there. I've also talked about the ecological consequences of our food choices, because if everyone ate a lot of animal foods, we have to deforest a lot of land to grow domesticated animals on, to feed a lot of people wanting to eat meat. And there's a lot of deforestation that goes on to grow plants to feed those domesticated animals that could have gone to feeding humans. Or we could have just left the forest in place, and that could have been the home of many different animals and plants, insects, fungi. The choice of what we eat and how we eat it, I think, is very complicated and very important too. Understandably, there were some people who watched my last video and were distressed by the fact that I killed an oyster and ate it on video, like within the first 5 minutes, probably less. And I found that interesting too, both in my experience of doing it and the reaction of people. In this culture that I live in 21st century United States, 2025, death is not talked about very much, of anybody, of people, of other living beings. It's something that's almost taboo to talk about. Dying. The fact that things come to an end, life comes to an end. Well, in a way. And I think that that's also part, do things actually come to an end? The energy that I am, that's my body right now, the carbon, the iron, the oxygen, the water, the energy that came from the sun and is in my body right now, it doesn't end with me. When I die and my body decomposes, those things continue. So there is a very peculiar aspect to our culture, the culture that I live in, that is afraid of death, that is afraid of its idea of ending, this idea of the individual ending. And I think that comes out when we actually see where our food comes from. As animals, we cannot create energy that comes from the sun, like plants can. Plants can harness the light energy from the sun and incorporate it into their bodies. We cannot do that. We have to eat the body of another life form in order to survive. That usually means killing the other organism, but not always. That that not always situation is if we eat the fruit or nut or seed of a plant. But that is eating the sexual reproduction part of the plant. So you still are eating a plant. You're eating that plant's chance to propagate itself and create a new being of itself. So in a way, you are still killing, taking away life. And I think that is just part of being an animal. Now, the things, I haven't talked about this before. Well, I think that it makes a lot of sense to eat primarily plant-based on multiple levels. Well, I've talked about this, that our microbiome is the healthiest when we get lots of fiber from plants, amongst the other things that plants provide. Our microbiome and our body function the best on a mostly plant-based diet. So I think it makes a lot of sense to follow a plant-based diet. And I think that people that follow a vegan diet are following a mostly plant-based diet by definition. But there are some things about veganism that I have trouble with. And that, I haven't talked about that before, but I'm going to talk about it now. Because some people brought up comments about it in my last video. And the problem I have with veganism is the idea that only animals have feelings and are sentient. Plants are just as sentient and alive as the rest of us. Just because they don't have eyes or feet that they can walk around with, or fins that they can swim with, or wings to fly away, doesn't mean that they're not sentient. They have roots, they've got leaves, they move towards the sun, they protect themselves from threats, they communicate with each other and the fungi. They work with the insects. They attract the insects to pollinate. They're able to sense injury and heal and repair. So this idea, there is a weird idea that some people that are vegan believe that only animals are sentient. Why is there a distinction? And so it's complicated. This is complicated. When you kill an animal to eat it, you end that animal's life. When you kill a plant to eat it, you end that plant's life. I remember watching this documentary called Seaspiracy, where there's some group of people that have a tradition of killing whales, and it looks horribly barbaric, and you see the whale suffering. But the argument that person makes is that one whale feeds the whole village for many days, and it's one soul, whereas to feed that many people in a village, you have to kill many souls of plants to feed everybody. So it is a very complicated thing. And this is not an anti-vegan talk. I think that there are a lot of very good things about trying to minimize harm to other sentient life forms, which I think veganism is about in many ways, but I think it's got a blind spot in that many people don't view animals and plants as sentient. And the other part to that is many of the plants are grown on land that was deforested. So many forests were cut down to grow those plants. And those forests were home to not only trees and lots of different plants and fungi, but also animals. So those animals died in order to create the farmland to grow those plants. So in this way, it is even more complicated that eating farmed plants from agriculture entails the cutting down of forests, which means the killing and destruction of not only trees, but the animals, the insects, the fungi that call that forest their home. It's very complicated. So, yeah, when I ate the oyster 2 days ago, I had mixed feelings. I eat oatmeal every day. Well, nearly every day. But I did not kill the oat plants to harvest the oats. I did not cut down the forest to make land to grow the oat fields. I did not destroy the home of the animals that lived in that forest that was cut down to make room for the oat fields. There are many, many layers to this. With 8.2 billion people on the planet, we can't all live a hunter-gatherer lifestyle because there are too many people. If we went back to living a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, many people will starve and die. And a much smaller proportion of people will be around because the reason why we have 8.2 billion people is because of this way of life that we have, this civilization based off of totalitarian agriculture. So is veganism the way? I don't think so. Is a carnivore diet the way? Definitely not. That would definitely deforest the planet way faster. I really think that, I've said this in other videos, I think where we really screwed up as a civilization is succumbing to the temptation to cut down forests to grow lots of food, plants. That is, I think, where we messed up. I think if we could go back in time and undo that choice, we would still be able to live in relative harmony with the other life forms on this planet. And there would be a lot fewer of us, and we wouldn't have all this technology and Netflix and YouTube. We would be spending all day outside gathering and foraging food. It was really interesting to forage shellfish 2 days ago. It took all day. it took 4 hours of daylight in the springtime here in the north to harvest enough oysters and clams that could provide enough calories for my wife and I. And I'm grateful to those clams and those oysters that gave their life to be my food. If we lived a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, we'd be doing that every day, all day long. So I can see the temptation why someone would want to cut down forest and plant food to store it up. But I think that there is also an illusion too, that cutting down a forest and planting a bunch of plants for food, and trying to maintain that is also an all-day endeavor. It's just that we created all this technology to do that, so that only a small proportion of the population needs to do that. So that this is all really complicated. Yeah. Well, those are some of the thoughts that went through my mind while foraging oysters, killing an oyster and eating it. Another thought was that if you trace back the genetic lineage of modern humans, you can trace back the people to about a group of 200 Homo sapiens living on the coast of Africa many years ago, like hundreds of thousands of years ago. And so they were living on the coast, and they were probably foraging shellfish like I was doing. So I felt it was like a weird connection to feel like, I'm doing what some of the first humans were doing a long time ago. That was interesting. There's a few other thoughts that came to mind, and one was taking food from the wild. Instead of trying to grow it in agriculture or a domesticated animal. I think that there's a couple issues with both of those situations. One, in order to grow the food in agriculture, you got to cut down a forest. You destroy the home for many living beings. And not only the living beings, like the forest itself is a living being, or many living beings. And then, in order to protect your crops, you've got to kill anything that wants to eat those crops. So, what people call pests, but they're other life forms: insects, rodents, birds, fungi, bacteria. And then, if you've grown a lot of crops and you have excess, you can feed animals to domesticate them and then eat them. But what kind of life do they live? What kind of life do they live when they're penned up and not able to run around and explore life like a wild animal? I think it's a horrible life compared to a wild animal's life, living unconstrained by the ideas of humans. So, getting a life form from the wild and eating it, where that animal, the oyster and the clam, was not told how it can live by humans, not constrained by humans, but was living as it wanted to live. Up until the moment that I killed it and ate it. I think was it was different. There's something different about it. It's different than eating like something wrapped in plastic that was grown on a farm, that was fed by plants that were grown in a huge monoculture in a field and harvested by combines after a forest was cut down. Well, those are my thoughts about killing an oyster and eating it. And just wanted to share them. So I hope you have a good day or evening wherever you are, and see you in the next video.